Okay, Rabbi recording.
Yeah, we're about to start. You just got one or two guys here want to go on the Zoom so they get a text. Sorry, can we start? We should start anyway. Has everybody who wants to have a place? Has everyone got a place over here? Then we can shoot. Can we? We go for it. Okay, l'chaim, everybody. L'chaim for the soldiers, l'chaim for the people. Am Yisrael chai.
Mashiach is after the war. Or maybe next week. Gog and Magog is now, wow. For Trump.
So, we've got a few Mishnahs in a row. Sorry, what was your name again? Shmuel? Shmuel Yehuda. Shmuel Yehuda. Welcome.
Thank you,
Sholem. So we've got a few Mishnahs that have a similar pattern. And we went through already one or two of them. Mishnahs which spoke about the last Mishnah. It said Shloisha Batim Hain, that there are three different types of houses that can be affected by avodah zarah, by idolatrous worship. And I say the pattern's the same because the Gemora had divided it into three, where it said that you can have a house that is originally built for the purpose of idol worship. You can have a house that wasn't built initially for that purpose, but people came afterwards and improved it for that purpose. Or you can have a house that wasn't built for that purpose, but then they came and they housed avodah zarah inside it. They moved the avodah zarah into it. And we said in the previous Gemora that if the actual purpose of the house, the original purpose, was that it was a monument for some kind of deity, for service of avodah zarah, there are cases where it can be irredeemable. That means that there's no way that we as Jews would eventually be able to use it. And then we said that if it was only improved for that purpose, if the initial reason that the house was not for avodah, the improvements came about as a result of avodah zarah, then you could remove the improvements, and as a result, like for instance, if it was plastered or improved in any kind of way, you could remove the plaster or the improvements, and you could sort of reset it. Control, alternate, delete in computer language. You could reset it, you could get it back to a position where it could be used again for general purposes. And then we said that if there was an idol that was housed inside it, then initially, while the idol is housed inside it, it's being used as a place of idol worship. You have a problem, but you could remove the idol. And once you remove the idol, then the house itself is no longer a problem. Now, the Mefarshim, the commentators on the Gemora, actually have a few questions. There's Rashi, there's the Ramban, there's the Rabbi. They have a few questions because we already learned that only non-Jews have a mandate to revoke the status of avodah zarah that some object has. In other words, if it was Gentiles that turned something into an idolatrous item, they have the power, according to halacha, to revoke what they've done, to say, "Oh, that was a mistake. I'm no longer going to continue with this," and they can make a change. They can revoke the avodah zarah status of the object or the building or whatever it is. But we said that if a Jew turns something into avodah zarah, we as Jews cannot revoke the avodah zarah status of most things. So based on that, some of the Mefarshim, some of the commentators on the Gemara wanted to understand, how could it be then that the Mishnah says that the Jew comes along, removes the plaster, removes the additionals, and then it's okay? Because surely, didn't we say that only a non-Jew can do that? How could we say, for instance, that if a Jew takes the Avodah Zarah that's inside the structure, out of the structure becomes okay? And there's a difference of opinion in how to explain the Mishnah according to the different commentators on the Mishnah. There are those that say that indeed, in fact, you need a Gentile, that when the Mishnah says that if you take away the improvements that were made, that it once again can be utilized. The Mishnah means a Gentile. In other words, if the structure initially wasn't created or built for Avodah Zarah, and then somebody came along and cladded it or cemented it, improved it for Avodah Zarah, and somebody else wants to remove the improvements, that somebody else, according to some opinions, must be a Gentile, based on the rule that only a Gentile can revoke the Avodah Zarah status of something that was made into Avodah Zarah, not a Jew. But then there are others that say in this case it could even be a Jew, and the reason being, because in this case, the entire extra is taken off. We know exactly what was added, and what was added is removed, and what was originally there was not intended for Avodah Zarah. And also, it's a stronger action than a mere revocation. We said before that with regard to a Gentile, sometimes even a verbal revocation can work. That I no longer want to consider this a deity. I used to believe in this statue. The person might say, I don't anymore. I've become improved, enlightened. I don't anymore. A pronouncement or a small action, I'm no longer going to serve this or pray to it or believe in it. A small action could cause it to be revoked. But there are opinions that say that if you're talking about scraping off the entire improvement that was made in order to designate the structure for Avodah Zarah, then that's such a big job that even if it was a Jew who did that, he would be reversing it from its status of Avodah Zarah. And that was the last Mishnah, which had to do with houses. The next two Mishnahs follow a very similar pattern, except they talk about other implements. There's one Mishnah here we're about to read. We read a few lines into it last week, which talks about stones that are hewn. You know, you bring the guys to, I don't know what it is, the quarry, where the big boulders are, and they knock out those big stones that are utilized to build something, like you'd find in, you know, old era structures. But when it comes to these kind of things, you've got similar definitions. We had definitions by houses. Now we've got a Mishnah, a Tana and a Mishnah, who's saying, with regard to stones that were carved out of, let's say, a big rock face, a big area.
The Western Wall was built.
Yeah, it was built by stones, exactly.
They didn't cut that side.
Exactly. They cut them out of huge big. And can you imagine doing that those years back without the equipment we have today? Yeah, cutting those things out. Sorry?
Little worm.
You mean the worm?
But then that also leads to a question with that on top of the so-called wall. What is that not fall into this kind of category as well?
One would have to have a specialist figure it all out. Not necessarily exactly.
Down into the wall, Al-Aqsa is not their mosque is on this side.
Yeah.
Their dome, which is sort of their deity, is right in front of it.
It's right in front of it, yeah. We could chat about it. What's that? Yeah, the words. It's phenomenal what they were able to do. So we're looking at the Mishnah, line 13. Line 13 says the Mishnah. Let's just catch a few lines inside. Shalosh Shavonim Hain, there are three kinds of stones. Even shechotzva mitechila labimus, a stone that was hewed out initially for a platform. We did read these lines last week at the end of the Shiur, but we're just rereading them and then we'll read the Gemora on it. These stones were hewn out for a platform, and the platform that we're referring to here is a platform on which they would erect some form of idolatry, some form of avodah zarah. Hare zu asura, this is prohibited. Why is it prohibited? Because the intention is clear. This was a particular thing that was utilized for avodah zarah. A bimus sounds a bit like a bimmer, but it's not. In those days, it was a particular type of platform that was used for avodah zarah. And if this was the original intention of the bimus, of the utilizing of this stone, then we know that the intention was avodah zarah and it is prohibited. Harei zu asura. The second category, just like with the house, it follows a very similar pattern. There's Mishnah. Sida v'chiyadal l'shem avodas kechavim. We're talking about stones in the second category that were not hewn out for the purpose of idol worship, of avodah zarah. But once they were hewn out, somebody wanted to designate them for the purpose of avodah zarah. So he covered them and coated them for avodah zarah. He brought, have you got the place? No. 13. 47, 13, yeah. Is it 47? Yeah. Thanks, Alan. If he plastered it or cemented it for the purpose of idolatrous worship. Got it.
It doesn't show this was used.
47B line 13. What have you got there? Hot scroll or?
The right side, it should say 13.
It's on the right. Yeah. I read 5
Mishnah,
quickly.
that you see. Stop one.
You there?
Yeah.
Right. But if it was plastered or cemented for the purpose of idolatry, he is able to take off, to scrape off what was plastered or cemented, and then those stones become permissible. Because he has shown that his intention is no longer to use those stones for avodah zarah, by removing that coating. And the last category is Hemid Oleh Avodas Kechavim. He used the platform to set up, to erect an object of idol worship upon that platform. Hemid Oleh Avodas Kechavim. Basilka, and then afterwards he removed it. Harei zu muteres. This too is permitted. It's no longer a problem. And now we go to the Gemora.
We call it platform, whatever. If that's made out of a hewn stone, it's
Yeah.
okay.
It's okay because he took off what he put on it.
Oh, if it was,
Yeah,
if it
yeah.
was left raw,
If it was left raw, we said 3 categories. One is that it was hewn out for avodah zarah, then it's not redeemable because that was the intention of making the stone. 2 was you covered it or coated it for avodah zarah. You could remove the coating and then it's okay. And the third was that it wasn't made for avodah zarah, but then somebody put an idol on top of it and used it as a platform for an idol. Once you remove the idol from the platform becomes okay. The Gemora starts to unpack this Mishnah. The 3 categories mentioned in the Mishnah by the Tana, now unpacked by the Gemora. Says the Gemora, Omar Rabbi Ami taught, there is a qualification here, there's a rule, that when we talk about coating it, it must be that he coated the actual body of the stone, meaning that you can have a more external kind of coating that might not even be properly adherent to the stone itself. You know, it's something that when you peel it, a little bit like fruit, you know, when you peel an archie or an orange, it comes off very nicely because there isn't really like a membrane connecting one to the other. You can have a coating that's fairly external. It doesn't actually affect the internal thing that it covers. So Rabbi Ami says, in the explanation of our Mishnah, that when we talk about coating a stone, that if stones were hewn out and somebody came along and coated them for avodah zarah, and we're saying it's a problem, we mean an intrinsic coating, a coating that goes into the inner substance, it connects in with the inner substance of that stone. The stone might be a little bit porous, and it might have grooves, and what's happening is this coating is actually getting quite attached to the grooves and to the stone that it's coating. And that's why we say that it affects the actual stone, because this person came along and he said, I'm going to use the stone for avodah zarah. In order to do that, I'm going to coat it in some type of coating that I like, that I want to clad it up or coat it with. And that kind of coating, according to Rabbi Ami, has to be b'gufa shel even. It has to affect the inside of the stone itself, or the body of the stone itself. If it's too separate, then something that peels off easily and is too separate, that's not, or at least at this stage of the Gemora, at this point in the unpacking of the logic, that's not what the Gemora intended. So once again, so the Gemora questions this and says, hold on a second. That's not what you told me when you were talking about houses. That's why I wanted to repeat the Mishnah about the house when we first started, because the Gemara is comparing the two to the other. When we spoke about a house and we said exactly the same thing, you can construct a house that's not for the purpose of avodah zarah. Then you can plaster it for the purpose of avodah zarah. We didn't make any mention over how adherent that plaster has to be. You know, sometimes you get a contractor, you might say to him, and if I want to remove this, what's involved? In other words, obviously you want the cover, but you also want to know what happens if it gets shabby, if it looks tattered, what's going to be involved in the removal of this particular type of coating. So sometimes they might tell you that it's easy to remove because it's not that adherent and attached and stuck to that which it covers. And sometimes they'll tell you the opposite, that you've got to decide you like this, because it's not going to be so easy to remove it. You're not going to get it off and peel it off so easily. So now says the Gemora, this Mishnah appears to be similar to the Mishnah we just had earlier about a house. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. With a house, we didn't make any conditions that the plaster must be very attached to the walls of the house itself. We sort of glossed over it. We said he covered the house and he intended that there's improvements for avodah zarah. And now you want to talk about, when it comes to stones, how adherent and clingy and attached the coating is. So by bias, we didn't talk about it being attached to its body. Umitasar, and we said, anyways, the house becomes prohibited when dedicated to avodah zarah. So the Gemara tries to suggest an answer by Isnami, by a house too. Ika baina urba, there's the grooves between the bricks. In other words, generally speaking, when they construct most edifices, they're not absolutely smooth. Nothing like whiskey for a scratchy throat. I was going to say, this is the best medicine. So the Gemara tries to suggest, you sing it over there. Yeah. The Gemara tries to suggest that even when it comes to a house or another kind of edifice, the situation is we have everyone's attention. We'll finish up soon and then we can all talk. Let's catch a few lines, then we'll finish up and talk. When it comes to most structures, most houses, the finish is not so smooth. Whether you've got your bricks or your tiles or whatever's there, you're going to have grooves, you're going to have gaps in the middle. And if there's gaps in the middle, it means that if you coat it with plaster or with any type of coating or cement, the cement is by nature going to go inside a little bit. The bricks and the outer work of most edifices by default is going to be a little bit porous. It's going to be a bit, if I can make a word, a bit groovy. It's not going to be, how would you call it, polished smooth. So anyways, when you start to coat it, it's going to coat inwards a little bit. But the Gemora doesn't accept this, and it says, it's always like a tennis match. That doesn't make sense. You know why? Because if the original purpose of building the edifice was not to use it for Avodah Zarah, then initially they would have built it. They would have probably put some kind of coating. Most people paint or plaster, unless they run out of money while they're building. But most people, when they build a building, finish it off. They like to finish it. So if you're going to say that a person came along and cemented and plastered specifically in order to dedicate the structure to Avodah Zarah, that would be a replastering. That would be what we call an overcoat, a second coat. Mila Yaskinon, are we not talking, says the Gemora, the Shiur, the Hodar Shaya, that he must have plastered once and plastered again. We always talk in what's called the most likely scenario. And the most likely scenario is that if a person builds a structure, they want to finish it. So they finish it by putting a coating. And if somebody comes along and says, I like the edifice that you made, I want to use it for Avodah Zarah, I serve a certain kind of idol or God or Avodah Zarah, and I want to take the thing that you built and use it for Avodah Zarah, so I buy it from you, and in order to dedicate it, I'm going to plaster it. That's probably a second coating. It's like when people buy something from somebody else, even a home, they normally want to put their own mark. In most cases, they want to put their own mark. So even if it's very nice, I want to paint it my color. I want to plaster it my style. I want to change something, the outer look, because that's how humans make something into their own or dedicate it their way. If you made everything, very seldom are people so humble that they say, listen, it's absolutely perfect the way you made it. I'm just going to move in and watch my TV program. In most cases, people take something over and at least a coating they're going to make. And the same thing if they're taking it in order to dedicate it for some house of worship, something of worship, they're going to put a coating, and that coating is probably going to come on top of another coating. Which means that generally speaking, what the Gemora is proving is that this whole business that the coating has to infiltrate porously the inner grooves, it doesn't seem to make sense. The Mishnah is talking about a coating. It could be an outer coating. It could be, for all intents and purposes, a coating that doesn't have strong attachment to the grooves on the wall. So the Gemora says, let's change the way that we understand this. Eloki itmar de Rabbi Ami, but rather explain it this way, that when we learned Rabbi Ami's observation or statement on this Mishnah, Le'inyan betel itmar, he was talking about the nullification, the revocation. In other words, Rabbi Ami wasn't saying the other way around like we've been saying till now, that in order for a coating that dedicates an edifice to Avodah Zarah, it must be something that affects the internal structure, that seeps into the grooves and the porousness and attaches itself. Rabbi Ami was saying the opposite. He was talking about when you revoke the Avodah Zarah status of whatever this is, and you scraping off the coating, you're taking it off to show that you no longer want it to be Avodah Zarah. So somebody might say, you can only take off the coating and save this edifice from Avodah Zarah if it is an external coating. But a coating that's really seeped in and become part of the building, that you can't really scrape off. That's too attached. That's not going to work. So Rabbi Ami wanted to qualify this and say, no. The author of the Mishnah, the Tana, is talking about any coating. It doesn't matter how attached it is, how external it is. When the Tana of the Mishnah said that if somebody put a coating over an edifice, a house, a stone, in order to dedicate it to Avodah Zarah, and the Tana said as long as you take that off, you can now reuse the stone. You revoked its status of Avodah Zarah, of the house or the stone. It doesn't matter how attached it was. So again, in the words over here of the Gemora itself, Eloki itmar de Rabbi Ami, when we learned the statement of Rabbi Ami, Le'inyan betel itmar, we were actually focusing on the betel. Betel means the nullification, the revocation, the rule by which you could revoke the Avodah Zarah status of those stones, or the Avodah Zarah status of that house. Rabbi Ami was coming to say that even though when he cemented it or plastered it, he cemented it or plastered it in such a way that it seeped right into the body of the stone itself, as long as he peeled off or knocked off or chipped off what he added new, shapridomi, it's fine. It's all okay.
This is a bit strange. Earlier we learned that if there was something that was so-called an idol or something, if it was broken and destroyed and it's no longer looks like it, we can't benefit from the pieces. So yeah, if you're removing just the plaster, isn't that effectively still the same thing? How can you then go back to
One second, we learned that
so if there was an idol and it was
we
smashed?
learned that you can't benefit from the pieces.
Yes.
In the case of a Gentile, you might be able to benefit. In other words, it was a Gentile who smashed it and said, I'm revoking the status of this thing as Avodah Zarah, then you would be able to. If it was a Jew and it was his Avodah Zarah, then yes.
But yeah, us Jews can remove the plaster.
Yeah, we can remove the plaster.
Then why couldn't we break the idol? That's what I'm trying to say. They're not the same because
No,
you're breaking
it's not considered. It's not considered the same here because the original platform is not necessarily Avodah Zarah. In other words, here we're talking about something that the original structure doesn't have to be Avodah Zarah. It was afterwards that somebody cemented it or covered it to make it into Avodah Zarah. So in other words, what we're saying is that when you add, the additional becomes the Avodah Zarah and the original, like in business, in business terms, there's the capital and the yield, basically. The yield, the extra, the additions were the Avodah Zarah. But the original amount or the original body of it is not Avodah Zarah. The Mahu the Tamer, I might have thought, because of the fact that when the person cemented and plastered the actual body of the stone, that perhaps this would be considered a stone that was hewn out originally for the purpose of idolatry, domya. That would be the similarity, the equivalent. And therefore all of it should be forbidden. Kamash Malon, we learned otherwise. In other words, what he's saying is the following. Let's just explain it outside. What he's saying is, we've said that if the whole purpose that the stone was originally hewn out was for Avodah Zarah, that's a problem. That's not easily redeemable. But if the stone was hewn out for a neutral purpose, then somebody came along and covered it and said, now I'm coating it for Avodah Zarah, then the coating is the problem, not the stone inside the coating. But what if that coating was very strongly connected to the essential body, the inner body of the stone? So I might have thought that because the coating is so connected and attached to the stone itself, it becomes similar or equivalent to somebody actually making a stone for Avodah Zarah. Because you've now covered it in such a way that the covering is so connected to the stone, then perhaps it would be considered as though the stone itself was made for Avodah Zarah. And then you would not be able to redeem it. And this was what Rabbi Ami tried to explain, that it's not the case. The coating is the coating, the stone is the stone. And in fact, the bottom line is, on the Gemora that explains this Mishnah, the bottom line is that there is no difference between a thoroughly attached, absorbent coating and an external detached coating. The rule's exactly the same. The original edifice or stone was not for Avodah Zarah. The coating made it for Avodah Zarah. The stone is asur, is prohibited while the coating is there. The moment somebody comes along and removes the coating, he redeems the inner piece, which was not originally constructed for Avodah Zarah. The inner piece, the inner structure is redeemed by the removal of the peel or the external piece. Okay, so just to summarize, so we had a Mishnah. The Mishnah said that if a stone was hewn out for Avodah Zarah, it's a problem. That's why it was made. That's why they cut out the stone. The entire essence of the stone, no good. If the stone was hewn out for neutral purposes, to sell in building supplies, to whoever wants to use it to build, That has nothing to do with Avodah Zarah. Then the Avodah Zarah man comes along and says, I'm going to use it for Avodah Zarah. And he coats it, remove the coating, and you're okay. That was the second part. And the third part was that if the stone was used to create a platform and you put an idol on the stone, now it's not okay because the piece of worship is on the stone, but the stone is still only an accessory. So the moment you remove the idol off the stone itself is okay. That was the 3 points that the Mishnah made. What the Gemora said, we went through like a whole this way and that way, but the summary, the nutshell of what the Gemora was saying was that it was discussing 2 types of cladding or coating, whether it's extremely absorbent and attached, whether it is not so attached, and the Gemora came to a conclusion that it doesn't make a difference. Whether attached, whether not attached, if you remove the coating that was made with the intention to dedicate the stone to Avodah Zarah, then at the point that you remove it, what's inside is okay. Take off the peel, that's the problem. The inside is not a problem.
Does that only relate to startling? Would that relate to a structure as well?
Yeah, the last Mishnah was talking about a structure.
So that's a
Yeah,
structure.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
if you had a house that was bought by the church. And
Yeah.
converted into a church, and they did all the ornaments and all that way, so on top of that, if you went, if that was removed, already when this building was removed, that house would be in water.
Yeah, and you'd probably get it back to the state it was in before they started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's actually the practical, I mean.
Yeah, you might have even an easier route, is that if they, the non-Jews, revoke the Avodah Zarah status, then that in itself takes away its status of Avodah Zarah. So what we'll do, I think the next Mishnah we'll do the next time. The next Mishnah continues talking about Asherah trees and a similar pattern. If you planted the tree originally for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, with a tree, you can't talk about cladding and coating and cementing, but if you try to, what do they call it? What are they called? The guys that work with trees? Botanist. So if the botanist comes and he manages to like structure the branches in a certain kind of way. Sorry?
It's an arbor, not a.
Is it an
Arbor is the person that works with trees.
with trees?
Yeah.
Okay. So if the arborer comes and creates a scenario that the tree grows a certain way, so he takes a basic tree that wasn't planted for Avodah Zarah, it's a similar pattern, and he causes the tree to be to grow in a certain way for his Avodah Zarah. Maybe they like big branches lower down, whatever. He has a way of causing things to happen. The additional things that he causes to happen become the primary problem, not the original tree. So if you can differentiate between the state of the tree as it was before he started, then you would be able to prune off the additionals and you would be able to benefit from the tree. But if you can't do that, then you've got a bigger problem. And that's what the next mission talks about. We could actually just read it inside before we stop. The next mission says, Sholosh Asherah Hain. There are 3 types of Asherah trees. There is Ilan Shenatoi Mitchila L'Shem Avodas Kechavim, the tree that was initially planted for the purposes of idolatry. Harezu Asura, it's prohibited because that's why it was planted. It was initially made for that. What happened if he did his arbor work, whatever, he lopped off a piece of the trunk or trimmed branches for the purpose of turning the tree into Avodah Zarah? So he gave the tree a certain new character in order to dedicate it to Avodah Zarah. V'hechlif, and like caused it to regrow that way. Noitul masha hechlif. Then he can take off the additionals that have grown. And once that's taken off, the tree can revert to its permissible status. What happens if you use the tree? If a tree provides shade and shelter, so maybe he created an outdoor Avodah Zarah zone. He put some kind of deity under it. Perfect place for my outdoor statue under the shade of this tree. So now you've got the tree is framing his Avodah Zarah. So once it is under there, the tree is a problem. But then if you remove the Avodah Zarah, then the tree is not a problem because the tree itself was only an accessory. There's a thing that the commentaries on the Gemora call Machshirei Avodah Zarah. Machshire means accessories that facilitate the Avodah Zarah. They are not the Avodah Zarah itself. They are things that facilitate it. The rules regarding facilitating things are different to the rules regarding the Avodah Zarah itself. And then we'll carry on with the Gemora on that Mishnah next time. Yeah. Hey, Liz, that's where we're stopping, and now we chatting. Amen. Amen. Ah, okay, we can do that. That's a good idea. We're gonna say Kaddish for the.
Are we gonna say
Yeah.
the Bacher?
We can say Kaddish first and then a bracha. It can be the other way around too. Rabbi Hanani ben Akash Omer Rotz HaKadosh Baruch Hu Lezakas et Yisrael v'chimcha chibram t'mitzvos shene'emar Adonai chofetz l'man tzedakah yagil tzveira v'yadir. Medina Kholasar Vasar, the Haile Hoyne, the Chain Shlama Rabba Chino, the Chiz, the Rakmin, the Chain Richino, the Zen Richa, of the Karam and Kadam, when the Vishmaya, the Imru Amai, Hain Shlama Rabba Vishmaya, and Terry Malay Rakul Israel, the Imru Amai, Se Sholem in the Mav, Se Sholem, Alay Rakul Israel,
Just the interesting bit of information that came through just now. The women aren't voting. There's not in Pennsylvania, not around, all around. So because they're not voting and the blacks are voting, seems like things are swinging. I got it from somebody was reading out. This guy here.
Excellent.
Take care, sis. Cheerio, eh?